Thank you for joining us today for our Q4 2025 PPP webinar. Also, again, happy Thanksgiving to those who celebrate. And we're going to get started. Before we begin, uh, a little bit housekeeping. First, the session is being recorded, so no need to write everything down. You'll receive both the recording and the full report afterwards. We'll also love for this to feel interactive, so if you have questions, use the Zoom's Q&A feature and submit them, and we'll cover as many as we can. And finally, please keep an eye out for the polls throughout this webinar because they're going to be helpful in shaping the conversation around what you care about most in our next one. And I would also like to bring your attention to a special giveaway we are running until December 10th. We would love to get your thoughts on this webinar and the insights that we are sharing in our report. If you take the time to write a post on LinkedIn and tag us, we'll get in touch to send you a hat. So this is kind of what the hat looks like. It's a Podscribe branded hat. We have Cam modeling it on screen if you want to take a look over there.
Dare I say it is a popular hat. We hear a lot of people saying that they love these hats. So
Mhm.
we'd love to see you talk about the PPB and we'll make sure you get one.
Yes. And speaking of polls, we have our first one here. I would like to know, are you guys new to our PPP webinar? Maybe it's your first time, been here once or twice, or you're a super fan, you've been to every single one. Let us know. Here it is on screen. I'll
I
give
love
up.
this question.
I
It's always
I
nice to
think
know.
I think last time we had almost 50% of people saying it was their first time here.
Yeah,
So yeah, a lot of new people last time.
always love to see newcomers.
All
as
right,
well as the returning vets.
Yeah, absolutely.
absolutely. All right, let's take a look at the results.
First time
Wow.
here, 41%. That's awesome. Welcome newcomers and those that have been here. I've attended every single one. I have a feeling is either a Podscribe person or it's Adam McNeil. I'm just going to guess. Welcome all.
Yeah, it's really good to see a lot of newcomers, and that's a perfect segue into the next slide, which is the introduction to who Podscribe is. So a little background, we are the leading independent omni-channel advertising measurement platform. Brands, agencies, and publishers use Podscribe to help identify and understand what's working and where to optimize in their advertising. One of the ways we share these insights is through our Podscribe Performance Benchmark Report, our PPB, which is the webinar you're attending now. And we do this every quarter. We dive into the data to uncover new topics like net new reach, visitors, and publish and purchase rates, incrementality, and so much more. Is a very hefty report, and we won't have time to go over everything that's in it. However, we did cherry pick out some interesting insights that we will be sharing in this webinar. And with that, we're going to introduce our speakers for today. We have Pete, our CEO and founder of Podscribe. And then we have Matt, our head of partnerships. There he is. And also Cam, our senior director of partnerships.
Gobble, gobble.
Gobble gobble.
Okay, now I'm going to pass this off to Pete to get started.
All righty. First off, I want to apologize to everybody for dropping the ball on the microphone. I see Cam and Matt are making me look bad.
The
So
only one
yeah.
didn't get the memo.
So I will take the hint and work on it for next time. In the meantime, you'll have to just bear with me through these AirPods. But for the data for this one, it was bigger every time. It's pretty much bigger than ever. And a reminder that we look at the past 1 year, actually. We call it a quarterly benchmark, but it pulls in data from the last year just to have more data to make the insights more stable, more robust. About 80,000 campaigns. We tracked 600 plus advertisers, 200 plus publishers, over 20 billion impressions. And for the report, I try to say it each time, but we do spend weeks on these numbers. We go back and forth with them together as a team. We try to decide not only what will be most useful and understandable to all the listeners, but what are we really confident in that the data is actually showing? Because for anybody who's looked at this sort of data before, it's often quite murky in many cases. And you look at it, maybe you look at the median and then it shows one thing. You look at the average, it shows something totally different. So we do our best to only present conclusions that we think if somebody had full access to the data, they would agree with what we're saying. So all that being said, we're excited to present the latest round here. We trust these numbers. We look forward to making them more useful for you as we can. All right, not a lot of big changes overall on the fast figures. The install rate that shot up a good amount actually. The rest of them are relatively consistent. And for anybody who's wondering what is a visitor rate, what is a conversion rate or an install rate, those are probably the best ways to analyze how effective an impression is at driving an action that a marketer wants. So say there's a 1% visitor rate as an example. That would mean if you have 100 impressions for your campaign, you could reasonably expect to have one attributed visitor for that campaign. So the visitor rate can tell you how effective are these impressions at driving what I want to do. The higher the rate, the more effective the impressions are. So we use these rates throughout this deck. It's our most standard way to say how impressions are, how they perform. We also have the cost per visitor, cost per acquisition. We will be adding cost per install next time around. And we try to add the costs. We started doing it a couple of quarters ago, but they're super important because what you'll see in a lot of these analyses is that the impressions for, say, a host read, they do perform better than, say, the producer read impressions. However, but you have to factor in the cost. They cost more. So that's why in a lot of these cases, we think the most useful figure is the cost per acquisition, the cost per visitor, because not only does that factor in how effective the impressions are, but also the cost you pay for them. Because if an impression is twice as good at driving a conversion as another, but it costs 3 times as much, it's probably not worth it. So just some things to keep an eye on here. So, all right. There we go. Key takeaways. For this report, one piece of data that I've personally been wanting to include for a while that we at last got around to this report is the performance of net new reach. A lot of advertisers and publishers here probably talk about it. It's probably in your mind a lot. You maybe have a general intuition, oh, we should be trying to get more net new listeners. Well, for the first time ever here, we take a look at the performance of that to see, does more net new reach actually result in higher performance? Generally, the answer is yes, with it being more pronounced for the biggest spenders. We can get into more of that, but super excited about that one, as I think it's sort of something people have talked about for a while, but you've never really had any data on. Next, just a bit of a recap and kind of going off what I was saying there. We find that host read buys over producer buys, episodic buys over impression buys, and show specific buys instead of, say, programmatic or RON. These all perform better per impression than their alternatives. That means if you can get a host read buy at the same CPM as a producer read, or an episodic buy typically at the same CPM as an impression buy, they will perform better for you in most cases, at least on average. However, what we do see is that they're more expensive. And in truth now, in most of these cases, the CPAs actually more or less balance out. It's pretty interesting to see that the market has more or less found an equilibrium where the CPAs for these come out to about equal, despite these being clearly stronger per impression. So in the end, a lot of it comes down to price and knowing which are stronger, all else being equal on an impression level, but the price is such an important aspect. In this report, we dive deeper than ever on per industry breakouts. We've gotten a lot of feedback that people want to go deeper. The fast figures are helpful generally, but people want to go deeper. So we break out a bunch of new things by advertiser with the hope, or by industry, with the hope that it will give everyone a better, more accurate way to look up how their brand is comparing to other brands. One quick highlight is that incrementality percentages vary not only by the size of the advertiser, but also by the industry. One example is we see the highest incrementality actually with marijuana and CBD companies. One hypothesis is that podcasting is getting a much greater portion of their marketing spend than elsewhere relative to other companies. And also on that general industry breakout, we break out the advertisement industries by genre. And what we see a bunch of things. We've got a really cool graphic Matt can show that I think will be a staple in future PPBs. But we do see comedy and society and culture generally perform quite well across for most advertiser industries. So more to see there. All right, let me click. So that being said, let's get our usual simulcast update. And like we've shown the past 3 or 4 quarters, simulcasts continue to grow. What you can see in the yellow line there, if you focus on the yellow line at first, that is what percent of episodic campaigns that we're tracking have both podcast and YouTube views in them. It is marching fairly steadily up and to the right. So basically it's saying if you're an advertiser, 3 out of 4 of your buys when you buy a single episode, YouTube views will be included there. So we think that's probably going to continue to rise indefinitely. I think there's a lot of sense in having your episode on every platform. What is telling is that not only are podcasters posting to multiple platforms, advertisers are buying it. So I think it's important to note that these views are ending up in your buys. That being said, the black line there, what percent of simulcast buys are YouTube views? That's held steady, actually, maybe surprisingly steady around 60, low 60s%. So the podcast audiences are holding strong, just more shows are going to simulcasts. So yeah, it's the march continues. I think, are you surprised by this matter, Cam, or where do you think this could end? Or
I think as we saw, I'll harken back to Tom Webster and Sounds Profitable, some of the work that they've done in the past that kind of talks about people's attitudes towards listening versus watching. And it's clear in the data, at least based on what Tom presented, that people prefer to watch. And when they can't watch, then they'll result to listening. So to see that the preference is video sort of aligns with the up and to the right yellow line there from my perspective. So definitely expected.
Yeah, and I think of Steve, the head of product at YouTube, and what they presented at Podcast Show London, the changes and the innovation that they're bringing to podcasts as a player for YouTube. I predict it goes to 100. I think every episodic podcast is going to be posting a video portion, over the next couple of years.
It's a good prediction. Maybe the next 2 or 3 PPBs, we'll see that number continue to maybe get over 90%.
We'll see. I think the big question, though, the biggest hole in our measurement or podcasting's measurement is really this YouTube piece. I mean, if 3/4 of your buys that are episodic have these, and a number actually of buys that are impression buys also now have a simulcast component too, which we model for. It's sort of like, how can we measure these? I think a paper's coming out shortly that we did with Oxford Road to show that YouTube views probably perform a little worse than podcast downloads, to be honest, based on promo codes and survey analysis. That I think that, so I think they could be better modeled for. So we're releasing a smarter modeling, I hope, before end of year that takes into account what percent of a YouTube's channel are international, where the ad was, the type of ad. So I think there's more that can be done there. Ultimately, I think the real solution that we're pushing for is to work with YouTube to actually be able to measure the ads in an apples to apples way, just like a podcast. So we think there's maybe a decent shot there with the YouTube dynamic dynamic ads that's coming out early next year. So we're certainly pushing for that. If you're a creator in that or know anybody, we'd love to discuss it and talk with you further because we think that's super important. So, all right, that's probably enough. YouTube, net new reach, and a poll. All right. What strategies are you using to reach net new audiences? Ask the networks, the Podscribe planner, through programmatic targeting or DSP targeting, or net new reach is not it's not really a big priority for you, or you don't really have a method currently. Let us know, and yeah, eager to see the results here.
This question definitely from the viewpoint of an advertiser and agency. So if you're on the publisher side, maybe imagine what folks have asked you to do on the demand side.
Yeah, it's a good call. This question is a little buyer centric.
Yeah. A little bit of a plug for the Podscribe planner in there.
Yeah.
If you haven't used it yet, it's a great place to find net new reach.
Mildly self-serving. All right. How are we looking with the poll, Christy? All right. Interesting. Pretty good mix here. A lot through programmatic targeting / DSP, Podscribe planner, ask the networks. All right. I wouldn't say one major winner. Maybe DSPs, programmatic targeting. Makes sense. All right.
Great.
So as I was saying in the takeaway slide, we do see when we look at the data that when the campaigns with more net new reach, when they're reaching listeners that have not heard another ad by that advertiser, at least in the past year that we've been able to track, those campaigns do seem to perform better. So what we see here in the pie chart on the left and right is we see what percent of brands have a positive correlation between increased net new reach and improved CPA. So essentially, 3/4 of brands, when the net new reach improves, measured across all their campaigns, we see CPA get better, as in go lower. So it's pretty universal. I wouldn't say, I mean, not every single brand I'd say, but in most cases. On a slightly lesser note, on the right side, we see what percent of brands see when net new reach increases. So if they go from, say, 10% of a campaign's audience being net new reach to 80%, what is the likelihood that the campaign's conversion rate will improve? And 60% of brands see a positive correlation there. So not every brand, but it seemed like most brands do improve, but particularly in the CPA metric. So one interesting thing we did notice, though, that I think is very important to remember with this is that the bigger the brand, the more pronounced the effect of net new reach is on them. So for example, we drew a bit of an arbitrary line at 400K per month in spend estimated. And we see that the magnitude of the correlation is much higher for those brands. And that's the blue and yellow line on the left there. So those brands, I would say, without getting too much into the numbers, those brands had a relatively significant correlation, you could say, with CPA 0.65, where if we were to look, when we were looking at the advertisers and their performance, and we see, how many impressions are in campaigns with 10% net new reach, 20%, 30, 40, 50, like almost all of the top ones, it was clear, like the performance, like definitely improved for them. There was a couple weird outliers here and there, which I think is expected in any data set. It's always noisy, but it was pretty clear for the bigger buyers that performance was getting better, particularly with CPA. Below 400K, it was more of a mixed bag. Some advertisers, it was like, couldn't even tell, where there was the net new reach. There was no discernible impact. By and large, there was definitely a bit of an impact, but particularly pronounced for the larger buyers. Matt or Cam, did this surprise you? in any way, or more to be uncovered here? Or what do
You
you
go first,
think?
Cam.
Yeah, I don't think it's surprising. I think of the amount of spend that big brands are putting into the audio ecosystem. There becomes a point where, repeated exposure to the same audience becomes less of persuasion and, more akin to punishment. So when they can get that ad in front of a net new listener, I would expect to see this stronger performance.
And I think I agree with that, everything that you said. And to build on it, I think it's good general direction that if you're a larger spender in this space, net new reach is something to be sought after. But I think that there's other confounding variables in here that might be interesting in future PPBs to take a look at. Like for how long has this advertiser been spending in the podcast space might be an interesting thing to cut this by. There might be some others like how established is the brand just generally? Have they been in business for 1 year or 10 years or 100 years? And that might also impact things. But I think as a proxy using monthly spend, it's still a good directional insight. Net new reach is good if you're larger. And maybe a little bit more frequency if you're a bit smaller, maybe it might be a good thing too. But you still see some positive correlation for the smaller ones too. So just generally good advice. Net new reach drives better performance.
Right. And I think, yeah, underscoring to generally when I look at all these, I think CPA is the better metric to look at because it factors in cost. And now with programmatic inventory, like you can you're getting $7 CPMs versus $30 host rates. Like that's a huge difference that if you're not looking at CPA in these metrics, I think it's missing a huge part of the story. And yeah, I think the bigger advertisers, um, there's just a greater chance the people they're reaching, like who they've already heard an ad, have heard like a bunch of ads. Versus if you're a smaller advertiser, maybe they only heard like one or two. It's not as big of a thing. A third ad, second ad might not mean as much. It might still be pretty effective, but like the 12th ad, maybe a little bit less so. And yeah, just to call it, we are excited. We just released a product in beta now called Smart Serve, where we actually can anti-target your listeners that you've reached in other campaigns to be able to allow you to more effectively target net new audiences. So excited to talk about that if anybody wants at any time, but let me move on and pass it to Cam.
Yeah. And Matt, I think it's a great idea to do the tenure of the advertiser. Going back to the key takeaway that Pete had mentioned for marijuana brands or CBD brands having the strongest incrementality, right?
Right.
I think because they're newer to market, any impact that they're seeing is likely being driven by where they're spending.
Yeah, exactly.
So not to give us more work for the next PPB, but I think that'd be a great addition.
I agree.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Pete. Yeah, diving into a familiar narrative that we've seen and reported out on before, we've got a view into pixel-based performance versus promo code or vanity URLs and post-purchase surveys. Do want to start with a quick poll to see where the crowd is at. What are you guys currently doing to measure podcasts? Are you doing pixel-based attribution? Are you doing promo codes? Are you doing measuring just impressions and reach and frequency? Are you using MTA or MMM? Are you doing brand lift studies, or you're not doing anything and you need help? I'll also mention that if you stick around to the end of the presentation, for those that are doing pixel-based attribution, but maybe not with Podscribe, we do have a discount code to maybe make switching from another solution a little easier.
Shameless plug. Also, dude, this is a multiple choice. So if you leverage multiple things, which I know is not uncommon, make sure you select multiple.
Great call out.
Yeah.
Let's see those results.
All
Okay.
right.
Majority doing
Yep.
pixel-based attribution. Love to see that.
The audience
For
may be
those-
a little biased on our webinar.
For those
Very
of us
true.
that need help, though, we are happy to reach out and have a conversation.
Absolutely.
We can help
Please
you.
do reach out.
Yeah.
So, as I mentioned, this is a similar narrative that we've seen before. A slight shift. I think previously we reported Pixel capturing 6 times more conversions in surveys and maybe 4.7 versus promo codes. So pretty consistent trend with a slight variation. And this is very validating to see the correlation between survey codes and promo uh, post-purchase surveys and promo codes or vanity URLs. Promo codes are only capturing about 21% of those conversions, and about 75% whenever we're looking at the average incrementality of 28%. Post-purchase surveys are, we have to work harder to extrapolate. And when we do account for that average survey response, we're looking at 2 times more conversions captured by pixel-based attribution. And it's easier for that consumer to enter a promo code, right? There's usually an incentive, a percent off, or free shipping. And there are some watchouts when it comes to using promo codes specifically, because there are services like Honey or Retail Me Not. I know I'm guilty of scraping through their services to find something that's going to get me a better deal, even though I'd never heard of that specific promo code. So take those with a grain of salt. But ultimately, if you didn't answer pixel-based attribution on that previous poll, you may be missing a large portion of the performance that audio or podcast specifically are driving. So getting into some of the buy types, this is going to be some very familiar metrics for this specific trend. You may have noticed in the last PBB, we reported out on the upward trend of run of network and programmatic in a unified view. And we got some great feedback that that's maybe not the best way to represent the data. So thank you for that feedback. And as always, if there are things that you'd like to see, we welcome it. It's a core component of sort of how we arrive to these different metrics and breakouts. But now that we have programmatic sort of broken out, isolated, and separated from a show specific buy versus a non-show specific buy, we do see a significant upward trend versus this time last year. So from October, we were seeing a 3% of all of the impressions that we were tracking were through the lens of a programmatic buy. Now we're looking at 14% of those impressions are going through programmatic DSPs. So a massive uptick in usage, and this mirrors what we've seen in other channels. Podcast is definitely maturing. The tools, the targeting capabilities are making it much more approachable. I think Matt or Pete, if there's any other assumptions that we can make around here outside of people just becoming more familiar with it, what do you think would also lend to this upward trend?
I was going to, I was going to throw out there that I do think that a lot of publishers are trying to find more and more sources for monetization, and one source from that is definitely programmatic. So we're seeing more and more publishers sort of become more savvy in plugging their inventory into an SSP, and therefore can plug into a DSP and making programmatic buying on their network possible. So I expect this to continue to go up. If we can reduce the friction to buy within the podcast space, I have a feeling the ad spend in this space will just continue to grow every single year.
It's interesting. I mean, I guess podcasting, it started out as only 100% show specific buys, and now maybe two-thirds, maybe a bit more. We're down to that percent are show specific buys. My perception is that one reason is definitely the control programmatic or non-show specific buys can afford you, because maybe, of Rogan's audience, maybe only the carpenters in the audience really match your brand. So if you can be more precise and maybe match listeners who are buying similar, the same listeners, but on other shows, why wouldn't you do that in many instances? So I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think there's still always value in the host read show, the host read ad on one specific show for sure. But as alternatives open up to make targeting more precise, I think that's going to continue to compete with it. And I think more and more you can do host read buys that are maybe a little bit more targeted, and so I think it's going to continue to rise. Super fascinating trend to watch.
I will say and the last thing that I'll say on that is let's make sure we're not treating podcasts like radio. the creative that is being pushed through the programmatic pipes, I think is it's probably some of the most important aspect of performance, and not always something that we have a lot of good visibility into within even our own benchmarks. So I just want to make a quick call out. Whatever the audio creative is that's being pushed through those pipes, it's really important that you're sort of thinking about what is the listener doing in any of those given moments. And if we think it's just like radio, we're probably missing the mark there. So
Definitely. And I would say, using it as a tool, especially as we look at show specific versus non-show specific buys, using it as a tool to sort of cast a wide net to see, are there specific shows or specific genres that are rising to the top, gives advertisers and marketers the ability to see across a lot of different categories of content what may be working, that I can then double down on a more show specific buy. Because as we look at the numbers, show specific buys are certainly driving a much greater visitation rate, a much stronger purchase rate, and a more efficient CPA. One thing to remember, because we are looking across so many different advertiser categories, those conversions, those purchases could range from a $1 product to a $3,000 product. So I encourage you to see sort of how this stacks up against within your own particular campaigns. But yeah, similar narrative that we've seen across previous PPBs, that the show specific buys do perform stronger at driving consumer engagement or conversion. And another cut that we've reported out on before is episodic versus impression based. So across the board, we are seeing much stronger performance for visitation rate, for conversion rate, lower CPA, lower frequency. But one really distinct call out here is the difference in what percent of impressions have a frequency of 15 or greater. So for episodic buys, only 0.2% of impressions are having a frequency of 15 or greater, versus impression based, we're seeing 56 times more impressions are getting hammered with a high frequency. And to my earlier comment, right, this is where consumers may be feeling the punishment versus persuasion, because if we're doing an impression-based buy and we're not putting some guardrails in place, we've previously reported that higher frequency, we see a decrease in the efficiency for visitation and conversion rates.
One call out there. So it is still on average, 11% of impressions on impression buys go to listeners with frequency 15 plus, but each quarter it actually has been going down. So I think a couple of years ago with iOS 17, it was way higher, but since then I think with iOS 17 mostly fading on people's devices and better frequency capping and awareness of it being available, we're definitely seeing that number, which is in many cases not the best performance, slowly go away. So that is one thing too to note.
It's a great call out. Looking at host versus producer ad, Pete had mentioned in some of the key takeaways that we're seeing parity from a CPA standpoint, which is curious that the market has sort of balanced itself out from the more premium CPMs for a host read versus lower CPMs for producer reads. We see slightly stronger visitation rates and conversion rates across the board. So we are seeing very similar performance, which I think over the past few PPBs, there's been a larger gap that over time we're seeing these come closer together from a response rate as well as from a cost per acquisition standpoint. All right, looking at performance from devices. So we've got just a comparison between Apple iPhone and Android phones, and similar trend that we've reported in previous PPBs where visitation rates and conversion rates, as well as cost per acquisition, are much more favorable when we're looking at Apple devices. And looking at the share of impressions, 77% of impressions are that we've tracked were through iPhones, 15% through Android phones, and we've got 8% here that are other that could be Huawei phones or Google Pixel or smart fridges, anything that can consumers can consume content on. But yeah, much greater performance when we're looking at the visitation rate, and the assumptions that we can make around this are around not our study or not our data, but there are other studies that Apple devices and consumers that own Apple devices typically trend to have a higher household income or affluence. So maybe there's more disposable income that they can make a non-essential purchase. But if I were a marketer looking at the data for my own campaigns, this may be a tool that I use to shift impressions towards device types that are really driving a stronger performance for my specific campaigns.
Right. This I think is one that's interesting because the CPA doesn't seem to have been equalized by the market yet.
Mm.
Like they often are the same price. I think a challenge is that, Android impressions, there's not that many of them to like really make a huge impact. So, but in some campaigns, maybe there are. But yeah, I think as Cam's saying, it's largely in a sense because Apple is sort of a proxy for greater wealth. But yeah.
I also think the advertisers and agencies that can take advantage of this style of targeting is sort of enjoying the arbitrage, as it were, because I don't know of anyone right now that's pricing Android impressions different than Apple impressions. So it's a great time to be a buyer if you're buying programmatically to do this style of targeting because you'll just achieve that much more efficient results.
Definitely. So, being cognizant of time, we may move through some of these slides just a little bit more quickly. But looking at the trend, we are seeing similar results as previous PPBs, that the longer ad reads are more efficient per impression. We see a upward trend in conversion rates, or I'm sorry, visitor rates, where ad length of 30 seconds, we see 0.29% visitation rate. Ad lengths with 90 seconds plus, we're seeing a 0.34% visitation rate. And the longer the ad read, the more context that can be built, the more storytelling, the more engaging that the creative can be to persuade that consumer. But we do see a higher CPA, which we're assuming that is due to the longer ad reads having a more expensive CPM to take up more space within that specific podcast. Similar trend for episodic buys. We are seeing the visitation rate more efficient with that longer ad read. We've got a little bit of a nuance with the 30-second being stronger and sort of breaking that true correlation, but a much higher CPA for the 30-second than looking at 90-second plus. We've got 0.36% visitation rate and an $85 cost per acquisition. And again, I think the longer ad reads, especially on an episodic basis, which tend to be more host read, there's going to be the opportunity for consumers to be enveloped in that host read. There's that connection with the specific host. I know there's oftentimes that I'm listening to a podcast and it doesn't hit me until halfway through that ad read that this was an actual ad read. So the longer ad reads do show a stronger performance because it's likely more engaging or less immediately aware that the ad is sort of occurring. All right. Looking at ad load, this is something we reported out on in the previous PPB. We are seeing a continuous upward trend. This last quarter we're seeing the highest percent ad load with almost 11% ad load. And so, just to give that a clear definition, if in a podcast episode was 100 minutes long, 11 minutes of that episode are dedicated to ads. And while this may look alarming, I really don't think we're that too far off. Like, there's a lot more room to grow. Matt or Pete, I don't know if you know specifics on other industries, but I think TV is, maybe a third, 30% of the content are ads.
It's like
Is that
19 minutes out of 60 minutes of content or something to that effect.
Mhm.
So we're definitely not there yet. There are some podcasts that are there and past there, and I think that's probably a good maybe bellwether. If we look at what is TV doing or what is radio doing, that we should perhaps overlay that on what our restrictions or guidelines are for pods as well.
definitely? And I don't think this should be super alarming because there are views into performance when we're looking at ad read. And it does see rather consistently that host reads are much more resilient when it comes to higher ad load versus producer reads. And for some of those anecdotes that I previously gave, that consumers have a personal affinity with the host, or it may be more natural or less intuitive that the ad read is occurring. So they're more likely to remain engaged versus when there's a clear cut producer ad read, especially as we're getting into a higher ad load. They may be more prone to skipping through or fast forwarding to get back to their content. And I'll pass over to Matt to get into incrementality.
Perfect. It's like my favorite topic. Incrementality. So, pretty much every quarter now we release incrementality benchmarks. And I think it's always really important for us to define incrementality first. And so just to make sure everyone is on the same page, what is incrementality? The concept is when we measure incrementality, it isolates the impact of the campaign that we're measuring. And here's why that's important. It's important if we sort of do a bit of a thought experiment and we think of ourselves as a very large advertiser. Let's say we spend $1 billion or $2 billion a year in advertising, and there's some big juggernauts that do that out in the space today. And what they're doing is they're spending so much money across all channels, right? So they're buying in newspapers and billboards and display banner ads and paid search and all of these things. One of the questions that those larger advertisers have when they're looking at their channel performance is, okay, of the conversions that we're saying this channel is driving, how many of them would have happened anyway because they're being hit by all of these other channels? Well, that question is answered through incrementality by constructing a control group. And the concept is you create a control group that's supposed to look exactly or as close as you can to the attributes of the exposed group. The only difference between the two groups should be that one group was exposed, one group was not exposed. And so when you run attribution on those two groups, you should get a different conversion rate between those two different groups. And the difference in conversion rate between the exposed group and the control group is the isolated impact of the campaign or the incrementality of this campaign. And so one of the ways to let's keep on going. One of the ways to do this is through, we offer incrementality as well, but there's a few other ways to do it. We'd love to hear more from folks on how are you measuring incrementality, conversion incrementality today? Keep in mind, so that's different than brand lift. So if you're really only measuring brand lift, you can throw other out there. But we're talking about conversion lift. And some of the ways that we've seen it, folks that are using geo holdout tests, typically programmatically through a DSP, some folks that measure via a media mix model. Again, sorry, a little bit of a self-serving plug, but do you also leverage our always on incrementality just by flipping the toggle on the Podscribe dashboard and seeing your results in incremental form? Are you not measuring incrementality? Throw a hand raise there. And then again, the other, maybe you're not measuring it. Maybe you don't need to measure it. Maybe you're only doing brand lift studies. Curious to hear what people have to say. So what are results here? What are people saying? Wow, it's really split up across the board. First of all, it's great to see the 30% of you that are using the always on incrementality in the Podscribe dashboard. That media mix modeling number, I feel like, is going up and up and up over time here because media mix models seem to become more popular just with the degradation of audio, or should I say degradation of online signals to use for attribution. So media mix modeling seems to be more and more prominent. But this is great. And for those of you that says that you're not and you need help, more than happy to reach out and see what we can do there. So thank you for taking the poll. And so now let's dive in on the actual results themselves. So now that we're all incrementality experts, we can start talking a little bit about what are the benchmarks, at least across podcasts and streaming audio. And then for the first time ever, we're going to dive in on some specifics in terms of breaking out those incrementality results out by advertiser industry. So you sort of get a better understanding as to, which each industry sort of enjoys from an incrementality perspective. At least we're going to show the top three because scale can be hard in these data cuts. But generally speaking, podcasts drive more incrementality than streaming on its own. And when you combine the two, we see maybe slightly lower incrementality when you're running both podcasts as well as streaming audio. And there's obviously a question as to why. So if you've sort of read a PPB or you've been to one of these before, this isn't going to be a surprise to you. But the confounding variable here is sort of what we call the size of the brand. So we're sort of using how many unique site visitors a month as a proxy here. But the smaller the brand, typically the more incrementality that you enjoy. Now, usually what we think about from a smaller brand's perspective is these brands are probably buying in one, maybe two channels, maybe three, right? Depending on their size. They're really trying to drive some market awareness and trying to drive some solid purchase rates that are going on. They're going to be selecting maybe one or two or three channels. And if podcasts are one of those, they seem to have very high incrementality. Now, as you start to go to the right on this graph with larger and larger advertisers, again, using the monthly visitors to the website as a proxy for that, we see less incrementality. And that's sort of expected in our minds. Less incrementality is expected because there's likely going to be more channels that are competing for that consumer's attention as you get bigger, because you're going to be using more channels to drive attention. And so as we see the size of that brand go up, we see incrementality go down. Again, fairly expected. We see a very similar thing in streaming, right? Although for those advertisers that are in the sort of very beginnings and they're selecting streaming audio as one of their immediate or beginning channels, they see even more incrementality. So it might be an interesting thing to think about as you are, let's say, scaling out a new product or scaling out a new brand, that these two channels, when you're smaller, do a great job of driving sales. So definitely smaller, newer brands see a lot of great performance. I would also say that the incrementality that we see for the larger advertisers to the right of that, this is not an uncommon amount of incrementality. Seeing like 13, 16, 7%, it's not uncommon. We're used to seeing like channels like radio or TV drive the majority of it. And so this is, I would say, expected as brands get bigger, because again, just kind of fighting across the different channels to get
right.
Yeah, please, Pete.
I would say too, I mean, I think it's the bigger brands are just doing so much more on other channels, but also if you're a new brand with no customers, if your podcast ads are people hear about and then go and purchase, odds are pretty good that they became a customer because of that ad, versus if you're like McDonald's and you send an ad to a bunch of people, well, a lot of people are probably already going to go there regardless. So I think it's also what percent of the population is your customer already too. I think that's another way that might be helpful too to look at it.
Agreed. Cam, you have other thoughts on that too?
No, you hit it perfectly.
Yeah. And so as we start to expand out a little bit, we are going to now, over the next few quarters, breaking this out by advertiser industry. And we wanted to have more here, but again, as you start to slice and dice this data, the cuts become a little bit too thin. But what we see here are the industries that sort of achieve the best incrementality, purchase incrementality within the podcast space. Again, marijuana, tobacco, one of the reasons why these are relatively new companies, at least the marijuana companies, that makes up the majority of this benchmark. There's also a lot of restrictions in a lot of other channels too, and podcasts don't have the same level of restrictions. So they really enjoy incrementality because podcasts are sort of one of the only channels that they can truly advertise on. So seeing that incrementality that high is sort of expected. And then supplements and technology seem to do very well. I would argue supplement advertisers have figured this out, because it seems to me that supplements are the majority of advertiser industries today, at least those that we're tracking and measuring today. It's probably the largest cut within this data set, because there's something like 40 plus advertisers in the category that we're measuring within this data set. So it certainly makes sense. On the streaming side, we see food and beverage, financial services, and fashion retail enjoy higher than benchmark incrementality as well. We've definitely got some thoughts on that, but I'm recognizing we only have 8 more minutes. So I'm going to keep powering through this so we can make sure we get all the insights going here. But expect more advertiser industry breakouts as the PPB comes out quarter over quarter here. Next, show genres. We've been sort of doing this, both advertiser industry and show genre graphs. They kind of show what the performance across all of these industries are. It's going to be included in the actual PPB. In this instance, just kind of wanted to showcase a couple of the top that are here. Retail does the best in terms of purchase rate and cost per visitor and cost per acquired customer. So they do great within the podcast space here. Media and entertainment does really well in visitor rate, so driving engagement pretty quickly. I will say that the honorable mention here is probably gambling. So they have relatively high cost per visitation, but they're really good in cost per acquired customer. So when you get someone who is engaged, they really engage. And then finally, telecom. Telecom is mixed. And the reason we think it's mixed, it's a fairly fought over industry. It's kind of a zero sum game in many instances, as people sort of only have one internet service provider or one phone service provider. So it's sort of expected here. But that's advertiser highlights. Let's dive in on B2B and B2C. And so the general highlight or insight here is this concept that B2B advertisers have to work a bit harder, both on a per impression and a per dollar basis. So we look at the far left, median visitation rate, where B2C outperforms slightly, a little bit over 10% better than B2B. Same with purchase rate, although it's almost double. And on a per dollar basis, right, B2B is slightly more expensive to drive people to visit and certainly a lot more expensive to drive people to convert. Big reason why, there's a lot more key stakeholders to find in the B2C space versus the B2B space. It's a lot harder to find the person who makes the decision. So it's going to take our media a bit more effort to find that right person. Now, one of the things in here that I think is important is not all B2B products are the same, right? Some B2B products are $9.99 a month. Some B2B products are like $1 million, $2 million contracts. And so one thing that we want to do here moving forward is try to get enough scale to be able to break this out to like lower mid-tier B2B versus enterprise B2B and kind of see how those numbers are different. My hypothesis is enterprise B2B is going to be a lot harder. It's going to have to work even that much more harder than some of these benchmarks, but that's something we want to look at in a future benchmark report. Very quickly, we're going to dive in on genre. We got our final poll here. Which show genre do you find most impactful? So if you're an advertiser agency, obviously, which ones are sort of your go-to that seem to drive good performance? If you're on the publisher side, what do you recommend? What do you want your buyers to buy into because you just see consistent performance over time? And as people are answering this, one of the things that we do or that we're going to do next is show you like a heat map or a matrix of the breakout of advertiser industry crossed with genre. And we can kind of see where are the bright spots and where should advertiser industries be focusing on in terms of buying, and which genres should they include in their plan. So, all right. So which show genre do we find most impactful? Survey says. Wow, that's great. So business, health, and fitness, that's really good. I see technology in there, which is good. It's interesting. We have a bit of a gap and then society and culture, which is sort of the winner here. And we got a pretty smart audience because a lot of our insights say society and culture should be a staple within the advertiser industry conversation here. So that's great. So show genres at a super high level, right? We see business, kids and family doing a really good job. Health and fitness and education are consistent performers. Although news seems like it underperforms, as we start slicing and dicing news, we find some advertiser industries that do very well in news. And so it shouldn't necessarily be ignored. So before we dive into that too much, let's look a little bit at these matrices. Now, let me explain what you're looking at, and then we can move forward with these pretty quickly so you can get about your day. But here's the concept here is we have on the y-axis, I'll say, the rows is the advertiser industries, and the columns are the genres. And anywhere you see a filled square, that's a good thing. It means it's performing above benchmark, and it should give you a little bit of a map on if I'm a given advertiser industry or if I'm representing a certain genre, who or where should I be focusing on? And so the darker yellow means that we have enough data within that specific slice to have a lot of confidence in this. And then sort of like pastel, lighter yellow means we have a little bit less confidence because we need a little bit more data in that slice to have full confidence. But it can be a little bit challenging to kind of see what's going on here. So let's just call out some specifics. So I'm going to gray out everything, but let's just focus on comedy and society and culture. Like I said, we have some really smart people here. Society and culture, as well as comedy, are sort of consistently driving above benchmark performance. You have a hard time finding sort of any advertiser industries that don't perform here. So what we like to say is, if someone is planning podcasts, that comedy and society and culture are a good staple to start with, for sure. Perhaps not everything, but a good staple to start with. And another way to look at this data, not just by the columns, but also by the rows. So let's look at supplements. We kind of called out supplements as being seemingly a very large advertising industry within the podcast space. And we see them seeing great performance across a wide variety of different genres. Society and culture, comedy, including those, but also things like arts and business and true crime and TV and film. So again, just a great map to kind of give people an idea as where they should be buying or where they should be planning in the beginning stages of their campaigns. Similarly, we can see the same thing in cost per visitor. I want to call out news, right? We sort of called out news as an underperformer, yet as we start slicing and dicing by industry, we do see that news starts to rise above when comparing to benchmark. And so there's some great, I think, industries that make a lot of sense here within news, right? I see things like government and education makes a ton of sense, technology, financial services, nonprofit, B2B, but also some others like fashion retail and software and consumer products that might be a little bit surprising. News to me is sort of like a secondary platform that people should be considering, especially within those advertiser industries, because it does a great job at driving efficient visitation. And then we'll keep powering through this really quickly. In terms of purchase rate, we see health and fitness, true crime, TV and film sort of highlighted quite a lot within this matrix here. And I think some unsurprising advertiser industries that really shine. Fashion retail certainly makes sense within the true crime and the TV and film and health and fitness space. We see health products as well as a favorable thing here. And then maybe one thing that's interesting is B2B sort of shows up as well. So let's talk about B2B just for one more second. This is that same matrix from a cost per acquired customer perspective. And what we see here is that the B2B audience really engages well. And we think it's because the B2B audience can really be found anywhere and everywhere. They're not just listening to B2B podcasts or business-minded podcasts. They're listening to kind of everything. And so finding them seems like you can find those that engage across these various genres that have that have their square filled. So that is the advertiser industry show genre matrix that we will be updating now on a quarterly basis. So we leave you really quickly here with the four main things that we talked about. Net new reach is a good thing. We see the industries that perhaps have not as much tenure in the world driving really great incrementality. We see that host rate, episodic, and show specific buys, although perform on a per impression basis better, typically level out on a cost per dollar basis. And finally, comedy, society, and culture podcasts do a great job for most all industries, a great place to start if you're looking to get into the space. Again, if you've got questions, luckily people have been great at submitting those. But one thing that I'll kind of leave you all with, we love doing this on a quarterly basis. If you want to maybe throw a little bit more eyeballs on the post that we talk about the PPB, we would love to get your thoughts, your discussions. What did you like? What didn't you like out there into the LinkedIn ether? And we'll reach out to you and we'll make sure that we get you a Podscribe hat. Again, Cam Weber's doing a great job at modeling that off over there.
Great hats.
The great hats. And then also too, if we have the opportunity to work with you after this and you're a new customer, first of all, we love to work with new customers. We're willing to throw out a 20% off your first 3-month coupon to work with us. We hope that incentivizes you to at least reach out and have a conversation. So thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it. And I'll pop it back to Christy here to end us.
I think you said everything I needed to say, but again, appreciate everyone for joining us. Happy early Thanksgiving. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and we want to see those posts on LinkedIn. Make sure to tag us.
Thank you for that.
We have a short survey after this. Feel free to stay and answer, but we'll also be sending it out through email. Thank you again. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.